Hi everyone. Today we have with us Professor Ajit Kumar, who is the founding head of the Department of Archaeology, University of Kerala. He has excelled himself in the field of art, architecture and Kerala archaeology. Today we will be talking about the much debated Shasta Ayyappa iconography. Professor Ajit Kumar was Director of Excavations at Vizhinjam and Arikadi. He has also featured in the panel of eminent archaeologists released by the Department of Culture and Tourism, Government of India in 2016. He has over 80 publications in different journals, articles and books. I welcome you, sir, to today's talk.
Thank you, Rahul, for that wonderful introduction.
Sir, your archaeological studies on art, architecture and its religious significance have been well received among scholars. Interestingly, you have recent publications on the debated topic of Shasta Ayyappa iconography. I'm sure the general public would like to hear an archaeologist's perspective on the Shasta Ayyappa iconography and its so-called relationship with Buddhism.
It's interesting to see the development of iconography in various divinities in Kerala. I've been working on Ayappa for quite some time. My first publications on Ayappa came out in 2011. Subsequent to that, there was a lull in studies in Ayappa iconography and Shasta iconography, though I was been researching on these particular aspects. And in the past 2 or 3 years, there have been a lot of controversy and a lot of discussions coming on Ayappa and Shasta. So I revamped myself into going ahead with the same research which I had actually discontinued for some time, and I brought out actually my facet of my research into publications, which was published in a journal called Kala and subsequently in a journal called Heritage. And when I looked through the internet, I found that many opinions have been raised over this particular deity and issues pertaining to Sabrimala. Hence, I thought it's also, as my research after its publications, many people have appreciated the new aspects which I mentioned in these research. And so even I was taken forward to bring it across to the common man in the country and abroad, so that the new research which is based on iconographical aspects of these deities, literature and as well as the depictions and paintings. So I thought it will be best that I bring out this in the form of a video so that common man can also interact equally well without going into publications or reading through articles, and it would come across to people more easily. So that is how I am into now recording this particular aspects on video. And to my perception and what has emerged from my research is that iconographically Shasta, Ayyappa and Buddha are three different deities in iconographical perspectives. And over a period of time, people have started borrowing elements from each aspect and then merging it into one, and then creating a lot of debates and issues about the iconographical perspective. When I come to discussing the iconographical perspectives, I think Buddhism as a religion dates to around 6th century BC, its founder being Buddha, and some of the earliest images to be carved in India was of Buddha. So I think I'll discuss first Buddhism and its perspective in relationship with Kerala, and then move on to Shasta, and then probably at the last towards Ayappa. Now Buddhism, as you know, as a religion emerged in 6th century BC. 3rd century BC, due to the evangelistic activities of Ashoka, Emperor Ashoka, and he making it a straight religion, it started spreading into different parts of India and outside the Indian subcontinent. And it is recorded in Deepavamsa that Buddhism reached Sri Lanka around 3rd century BC due to the evangelistic activities of Ashoka's son himself. And it is from there apparently that Buddhism started percolating into Tamilagam. When I talk about Tamilagam is an area which is south of the Tirupati hills, and bordered by the peninsular tip south of Tirumala Tirupati hills would be the Tamilagam portion. So a Buddhism started percolating into Tamilagam probably during the early centuries of Christian era, because in Sangam literature, especially Manimekhala and Shilapadikaram, there are references to this sect being followed in Tamilagam. So when we talk about Tamilagam, Chera, Chola, Pandyas are the main rulers ruling in this particular area. So Buddhism had its impact on all these three ruling dynasties, and as well as the area which was ruled by them. And initially the character of the Buddhism in this particular area was of Hinayana, and subsequently switching on to Mahayana. And the Hinayana tradition is only reflected in literature, but Mahayana activity of Buddhism is also reflected from the sculptures that we get from Kerala and in different places of Tamilagam. So the images which we get are reported from many places in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and many of these images show a typical tradition of the Anuradhapura school of art which flourished in Sri Lanka. It is recorded in Sri Lankan history that during 7th century there was a drought and there was some political calamity in Sri Lanka, and many Buddhists had migrated to different parts. It's quite possible that during this particular 7th century there was a migration of Buddhists from Sri Lanka, and they had actually brought their images into Kerala. So that apparently is a possibility of Buddhism coming from Sri Lanka. And this is also substantiated when you look into the character of, or the stylistic character of the Buddha images that have been found from Kerala, which shows a profound influence of this Anuradhapura school of tradition. And Buddha images are generally found along the coastal stretch, right from Kollam region up to Kodungaluru region. You have many images of Buddha have been reported along the coast. So it's quite possible that these were brought here by Sri Lankans who came here along the coastal stretch due to trade and other movement in that particular region. Now, all the images that we have found in this particular region, all of the images show Buddha seated in Padmasana, and he shown wearing no ornaments apart from his sanghati. And the hair is done in two different styles. The earlier style apparently is the hair do which is done in curly nature with an ushnisha. And subsequently, probably the image adopts a new style in the hairdo with Srivasta or a flame-shaped ornament adorning his head. So these are the basically two styles which are available in the sculptural traditions. So nowhere do you observe Buddha with Jatamukta, nowhere do you see Buddha images adorned with ornaments, and all of them are seated in Padmasana in Dhyana Mudra. Generally this is the trend. So nowhere else no other mudra has been observed generally in Kerala. In Kerala, Buddha images have been reported from Mardangalagara, Bharninyanam, Kottapuram, Mavelikara, Bharnikava, Karumadi, Pallikal, Onampalli, Mariyu, etc. And all these images are stone images which are not very large in size. They measure around 1 or 2 feet in height. And all these Buddha images are seated in Padmasana, and they show no ornamentations apart from the sanghati or the wardrobe which Buddha is wearing. The hair is shown in two different styles. One is as curly hairs with an ushnisha, and another hairstyle is where there are curls and they also have a shiraspasta or a flame-shaped ornament in the place of a Nushnisha. So both these styles are prevalent in Kerala, and stylistically they typically show affinity with the Anuradhapura tradition, which flourishes in Sri Lanka. So it's quite possible that all these images, either the images themselves were brought from Sri Lanka, or the artisans or the Buddhist practitioners in India, in Kerala, made these images in the same style. It's quite possible that there was, like I said earlier, that in 7th century there was a migration of Buddhists from Sri Lanka to different parts. So it's quite possible that these images, some of these early images which came around 8th, 9th century are data, which are datable to 8th, 9th century in Kerala, may have been brought by Buddhist, and Kerala is not very far from Sri Lanka, so it's quite possible that there was constant interaction between these two regions, and these images were brought from Sri Lanka. So these images show no affinity with the Shasta images, which is prevalent in Kerala, which is noticed in Kerala. Etymologically, the name Shasta, which also means ruler, teacher and things like that, was extended to Buddha, or Buddha also received the name Shasta, and taking on this etymological connections between the meaning which is associated with Shasta, the teacher or a ruler or a leader, when it came to be associated with Buddha also, then people started saying that Buddha, Shasta is a modified version of Buddha, if they are so. If Shasta and Buddha are in belief and iconography one and the same, they would basically have the same character in iconography. But that is not the case, because we have Shasta images also in Kerala, which are datable almost covial to around 8th, 9th century with the Buddha images which are seen in Kerala. But they show different characters in iconography. So they are essentially not one and the same. Now Shasta images belong to 8th, 9th century, or very early, because temple activity has been divided into 3 different phases, and Shasta images dating to around 8th, 9th century have been reported from temple complexes in different parts of Kerala. There are very early images dating to 8th, 9th century from Ramantali in Kannur. Then you have also images from Vizhinjam in Kerala. Then there are a lot of images from around 10th, 11th century. There are a lot of Shasta images found from Kerala, from various temples in Kerala. But what is interesting is that none of these early images were found installed in a temple. They were found installed on platforms outside the main sanctum sanctorium within the temple compounds of Kerala. So this clearly shows that Shasta was not an important deity to be installed within the sanctum sanctorum of temples, and he was actually his basic role was of a guardian or a protector of a temple or a premises and things like that. So he was basically kept within the temple compound, but open to sky in the temple compound in a platform. Sometimes his images were kept under banyan trees and essentially what I would like to say is that they didn't have built shrines exclusively for installing Shasta in the sanctum sanctorum. He was there, but he was more as presented as a guardian deity in different temples which is found in Kerala. And according to some traditions which was prevalent in Coorg in 18th century and things like that, there are reports that Shasta was considered a deity, protective deity, and sometimes fowl and other things used to be offered to him. So it's quite possible that offerings of blood or fowl and things like that were done to Shasta. That is why he essentially is not placed in the sanctum sanctorum of the temples. So he had a protective character or a guardian character. That is very evident, because even in Kerolpati, which is a late work, they say that Shasta temples were constructed on 8 hilltops, and Devi temples were constructed along the coastal stretch so as to protect the people living along in the landmass of Kerala from illness or other calamities. So essentially it reflects that he was a guardian and deity. Now all the images that nearly all the images of early images of Shasta which has been found from Kerala shows him seated on a pedestal with one leg folded and kept on the pedestal and one hanging down, and essentially he only has two arms. Now coming to this iconographical character, his other iconographical character is that he is always shown with Jata Mukuta. One ear is adorned with Patra Kundala and one is adorned with Ratna Kuntla. He also wears Yajnopavita, Katibandha or a waistband, and also armlets and bracelets and things like that are adorned. He is adorned with these characters. I mean, these sort of ornaments he is shown adorned with. So essentially, Shasta had a protective character. Now, where exactly Shasta gets converted into Harihara Putra it's a big question, because there are references to Shasta as Harihara Putra in literature, but there is no reference to Shasta in basically ancient Sanskrit texts. And Shasta got assimilated into the Brahmanical fold as a Devata, and after his assimilation or in the process of his assimilation, he is associated with a story which is mentioned in Sri Bhagavatam, Manshubhada, Vegal, Supravedatma, where there is a story that while churning of the Milky Ocean or churning of the Palari, beautiful Vishnu had assumed the form of a beautiful damsel or a lady, and called Mohini, and Shiva gets attracted to her, and in the union between Shiva and Vishnu, progeny is born. Now this progeny, though there is a mention in Bhagavatam, though there is mention in this story in Purana, the name of this particular child is not assigned to. But in subsequent literatures like Sri Bhagavatam, Anshubhata Vedagama and Supravedagama, they say that the child born out of this union is Harihara Putra. So, and this Harihara Putra is associated as Shasta. So, in a way, Shasta, who is basically a non-Brahmanical deity, gets assimilated into the Hindu fold as a Devata by assigning him the parenthood or the lineage as a union between Shiva and Vishnu, and that is how he comes to be associated or assimilated into the Hindu fold. And from around 17th century, there are some variations noticed even in the iconography of Shasta. Some independent temples come to be erected in his favor, and also generally in the early images is always shown seated on a platform or a stool with one leg folded and one leg hanging, only with two arms, with Jata Mukuta and other ornaments. From 17th century onwards, most of his images come to be depicted in almost other ornamentations, and Jata Mukuta continues to be the same, but there is a variation in the seating posture. In the seating posture, he is generally shown with one leg folded, and generally you will notice that one of his legs is raised and placed on a pita, and the other leg is tied up with or fastened with a yoga patta. Normally it is his left leg which is fastened by a yoga patta, and this particular tradition comes into being during 17th century. And from 17th century also the intermingling between, or there is a correlation or assimilation of both the aspects of Shasta and Ayyappa as such. So from basically iconographically, Shasta is depicted with one of the legs fastened, especially his left leg fastened, and there are also images where he is sometimes shown seated on an elephant. And generally Anshubhedavakanda and Supravadva says that Shasta icon should be forearmed, though we do not find any idol of Shasta with 4 arms or three eyes and things like that. There are paintings in at least 2 temples which show him in the character of 4-armed riding an elephant. And there are also some temples in southern part, especially in Trivandrum district, where stone idols of elephant are placed either under a banyan tree or in separate enclosures, and sometimes these locals call these elephants placed as Shasta, or these elephants as Shasta. So either it is a personification of Shasta, as the elephant is a personified depiction of Shasta, and in some images, in painted images, we also notice that Shasta is shown riding an elephant. So when he is shown riding an elephant, he is shown 4-armed with golden color, wearing a yellow veshti or a dhoti, and with 4 arms. So in generally in Shasta or 4-armed Shasta images are not noticed in sculptures. It is only in very late period, dating to around 19th and 20th century, that 18th and 19th century, that we find Shasta images depicted in paintings with 4 arms. So essentially, Shasta is basically a rural deity or a very indigenous deity assigned with protective character. He gets assimilated into the Hindu fold as Hariharaputra, and independent temples come to be erected in his favor. That is only during the late period. And this particular trend of showing the left leg fastened with Yogapata commences around 17th century, and there are many images in many temples where he is shown in this fashion, and they all show a very late character. And from 17th century, it is also interesting to note that Shasta comes to be also associated with his 2 wives. So there are images in bronze from Tamil Nadu, especially there are 1 or 2 images kept in Tanjavur Museum, and there are also images installed in small subsidiary shrines, especially in the Sri Rama shrine and Tivipuram in Vakyam. There is a small subsidiary shrine which has an enshrined image of Shasta with his consorts. There are also other temples where you find such images, but they are all very late images of Shasta. By around 17th and 18th century, the concept of Shasta gets also assimilated with the cult of Ayappa. Ayappa also is essentially a rural hunting deity, but by around 17th, 18th century, the concept of Shasta and Ayappa comes to be, so connected that sometimes you call Shasta as Ayappa and Ayappa as Shasta.
So you have provided us with insights about Buddhism and Shasta worship in Tamil Nadu. But can you provide us some information about the association of Shasta and Lord Ayappa? Are they 2 different entities, or are they one and the same?
That's a very interesting question. To the common man, to the believers, as of now, Shasta and Ayappa has reached a state where either one, they cannot be differentiated. Even if when you visit temples, the iconographical character of the particular deity might be Shasta, but to the common man it would be Ayappa. Sometimes the deity installed seems to show character of Ayappa, but it will be generally called as Shasta. So essentially both Ayappa and Shasta have their roots in the Sanskrit word Chatan. So this particular terminology or this root in Chatan have also given scope for some people to interpret that Shasta and Ayappa have their root in Chatan worship. So Chatan worship is something totally a different sort of worship form. But etymologically, yes, Shasta and Ayappa have their roots in the word Chatan. Now, like I said, by around 17th, 18th century, both these deities, started to be nomenclatured for one another, and essentially both were deities which were from the local milieu or from the very indigenous origin to Tamil Nadu. Now, the word terminology Ayappa, Appa and Ayya and Appa are two words which compose or which make the word Ayappa. Ayya is just an honorific term, it's used in many parts of South India. It is used in Karnataka, it's used in Andhra. In many places, a respectful person is known as is addressed as often as Ayya. So even in Tamil Nadu, there are many. Still, it's very common word where a person of some significance is addressed as Ayya. Appa is generally a fatherly figure, or so Ayya Appa is a person who's a dignified person whom you are assigning the character of a fatherly figure. So it's like again another typical Malayalam word called Muttappan. Muttu or Muttu means a very senior person who is given a status of an Appan or a fatherly figure. So essentially the word Ayyappan and Muttappan is all of the same essential character, where a senior person who's a fatherly sort of figure is addressed as Ayappa. Ayappa, the terminology is also never found mentioned in any Sanskrit or Brahmanical literature as such. Neither is he found in in Tamil literature, except for this honorific term. I don't think that this particular terminology as Ayyappa comes in any particular thing. And Ayyappa, even if he is assigned, sometimes it might be defining the character of Shasta or assigning the character to Shasta. Now, the first and the earliest reference to Ayyappa comes in the work Memoirs of Travancore Survey, published by Ward and Corners in 1863. Now, this particular work mentions that there was a temple dedicated to Ayyappa at Shabarimala. So now there are many things which occur for the first time in this reference. The first reference is that there was a temple dedicated to Shabarimala Ayyappa, but he doesn't mention the deity as Ayyappa. He calls that, he defines that the mountain deities, the temple assigned to mountain deities as located in Shabarimala. So that is the first reference we have in 1863. By this time, in 1863, the structural character of the temple was all, of Shabarimala temple was defined, because he also says it is built on a large platform. This particular temple is built on a large platform. There are 18 steps which are leading to the temple. So essentially the outer character as it stands today, that there is a huge platform on which the Shabarimala temple stands today, was already defined in 1863. Now, in a work dated to 1883, 20 years later, the name of the work is Native Life in Travancore, written by Samuel Batir, and this particular work says that the chief shrine of Ayyappa is at Shabarimala, and he specifically calls the deity as a hunting deity. He doesn't assign the term Hariharaputra or Shasta to this particular deity. He calls it a hunting deity. And similarly, in the first reference which occurs in 1863, which finds mentioned by Ward and Corners, clearly states that the mountain deities, it is not assigned to Shasta or any other deity, but he called it mountain deities. And the subsequent, after 20 years later, you have this reference of in Native Life of Travancore Mathil. It says that it is the chief deity at Shabarimala temple is assigned as Ayyappa. But again, the character of Ayyappa is defined as hunting deity. Okay, and now in between these publications of these two records, in 1873, F. Kettle, in his publications in Indian Antiquary, under the title Coorg Superstitions, he says that in Coorg, Ayyappa is also called as Malai Deva. So there you find again, he is defining Ayyappa as Malai Deva or Beta or Veta Deva. Veta or Veta. Veta is the Kannada form of Veta or hunting. So he calls Ayyappa a hunting deity. And this particular deity in Coorg region is represented as a stone, or a large or a small polished stone kept in a garden, that is a reserved or like a cave, or in some forested area. So he says that this particular Ayyappa is represented by polished stones or menhir like this thing placed on a platform. And he says that by then, that is by 1873, they had, this particular god had come to be in the boundary of being a native Bhuta and a Devata. So he says that boundary line has reached. So he says that Ayyappa had reached the boundary line, and some Ayyappa shrines where this represented stone were offered worship by the Brahmanas used to be the officiating priest in some of these Ayyappa temples. So it generally in some of these temples, though Brahmins were associated as worship, they also say that in some of these Ayyappa shrines where the fowl and other things used to be sacrificed and things like that. In some places he also says that in Tamil Nadu, where such Ayyappa shrines existed, pork or wild pig used to be offered as offerings. So essentially they show the character of hunting deity both in Coorg as well as in Shabarimala. In earliest records, the Ayyappa's character is only of a hunting deity. Now, in what form does this particular shrine comes up is a big question. Now, interestingly, in Native Life of Travancore, Mathir records that there was a temple, and it is the Malayarian community which worshipped him, this particular deity. And he says there was a priest or an oracle called Talani, and he was a performer of the worship in this particular Shabarimala temple. He says that 40 to 50 people used to travel together to this particular shrine because of the fear of wild animals. So they went in a group essentially because of the fear of wild animals. And he says that when the Malayarian community went in group, Talani, who was also the chief priest or oracle of this particular temple, used to say that he is not going to the temple, but he would often reach there before this group you could reach in the temple and surprise them, because he knew certain other routes to reach this temple in a easier manner. So he used to reach even before the group reached. So that was the association. So Talani essentially belonged to the Malayarian community. He also says that Talani was murdered by Chogans and another group residing in the forest. And it so happens that after the murder of this particular priest who worshipped in Shabarimala, he was buried in the forest by these Chogans who murdered him. And he says that Ayyappa's dogs, which he refers to as tigers, dug out the body of this particular priest from the ground and placed in such a position where people could come to know of him, that he was murdered. So after this particular happening, it so happened that the Chogans were infested with chicken pox or smallpox, and certain calamities occurred in that particular thing. And an oracle revealed that an image of Talani should be made and worshipped to overcome these certain obstacles. That is how Talani's image was created in bronze and started to worship in a shrine. So this clearly shows that the worship of ancestors or oracles or senior people in the society in that forested Malayarian community existed as a practice. And Mathir also says that there are many small temples and chromeliths or dolmens or megaliths scattered around the area. And he says that the Salani shrine also was not very large or a very large temple, but images of Talani in bronze is recorded by Mathir. And interestingly, even today, the Chola Nayakans and Pati Nayakans residing in Nelambur, they have these sort of images made in bronze of ancestors kept in their sacred places, and it is worshipped. So they say that the Atma or the spirit of that particular dying person is never allowed to depart from the family or the clan. So as the person dies, the spirit of that, or the Atma of that particular dying person is absorbed into this particular bronze figure and kept and worshipped. So though Padinayakans and they mention of this particular practice now, similar practice is also recorded by Mathir. He says that the spirit of that particular deceased person would be absorbed into the bronze image, and that is how that particular one worship. So ancestral temple worship of ancestors by creating image or erecting small temples at their funeral places existed in the hill regions of thing is very clear. And this is also obvious from the practice in Coorg, where some of these particular temples represented by menhirs. Menhirs is again a category of megalith. So essentially the association of death and memorial temples is associated with many of the temples that was constructed or that were located in Shabrimala region. And Mathir mentions that there are many scattered places. Even in our own survey, which was conducted by Dr. Rambli as part of her research projects, many places in Pathanamthitta district, in very forested terrains, very deep into the forest, we have located. She's been able to locate ruins of temples in many places, Gabi, Kokatod, and many other places. They have been able to locate ruins of temple. And interestingly, like it existed in Coorg region, that sometimes the image is not placed. Even Mathir refers that sometimes the bronze image is not made. In fact, it is substituted by a very smooth stone is represented as the ancestor there. Similar practices are even conducted even today by Kurumbas of Nilgiri, Padinayakans of Nelambur region, and also we have noticed in one site in particular in Pathanamthitta district, there is a temple where a Neolithic looking or Neolithic celt, like very smooth and polished stone is kept and worshipped. So essentially, Ayappa seems to be a deity connected with the tribal ethnic population, and also hunting as a matter of fact. Now, apart from the traditions in Coorg and the Shabrimala hill ranges, which associate Ayappa with a tribal divinity associated with hunting, there is also a legend or a folk tradition in Kerala which associates Ayappa with Manikanda. Now Manikanda is believed to be a boy of Salvan or tribal origin, probably belonged to the Malayaran family, who was found in the forest by Panthalam Raja. And there are many versions of the story. Some say that he was found by Panthalam Raja as a small boy and then adopted into the family. Some say he was on a hunting mission when the Panthalam Raja went. He had a confrontation with youth, and subsequently realizing his bravery, he was brought into the Panthalam royal family. There are many stories related to Manikandan as a person of tribal origin who came to be adopted by Panthalam family. If you go by the myths and legends which are so often repeated, and the association of Ayappa or Manikanda with Vavar, who was probably a trader or a small petty chieftain or some person of some importance in that locality, and some of the grants offered by Panthalam family to the family of the Vavars, and his depiction in painting seem to show that Ayappa or Manikandan was a historical personality. Now, what exactly was the role of Manikandan in Panthalam family is it's subjected to debates and discussions, because there are many stories. So what exactly is the truth in these stories we wouldn't know, but he definitely seems to be a historical personality associated with the Panthalam royal family. And it appears that he fell out with the Panthalam family due to some sort of disturbances or some sort of non-acceptance within the family of Manikandan. And Manikandan, it is said that he left the palace and went into back into the forest. And some say that Ayyappan had grown to the stature of a commandant under the Panthalam Chieftains. Now, who were these Panthalam Chieftains? They say that their origin is from Madurai and they are connected with the Pandya family. And when exactly they came to settle at Panthalam is a big question. Definitely none of these early historical records mentions of a family at Panthalam. It's quite possible the Panthalam family comes to establish itself as a minor chieftain around 16th or 17th century in Panthalam region. And one of the kings is associated with Manikandan, and this tradition continues in the myth and legends of Kerala. Now, who exactly was this Panthalam king also it's a point of debate, and when did this happen is also a question of debate. But definitely there seems to be a strong undercurrent and belief that Manikandan was associated with this royal family. He grew in stature to become a chieftain, and it seems to be some sort of fact related to the story seems to have some sort of facts also based on some sort of facts. Now, the Manikandan Sami, as I said earlier, he probably belongs to the tribal lineage of the Malayarians, and like I said earlier, Talani, who was the Malayalian family, was one of the chief priests in this particular family. It is quite apparent that since Ayappa had grown into some sort of privilegious position under the Panthalam kings, and subsequent to his abandoning this Panthalam kingdom and then moving on to the forested terrains, it's quite possible, because of the repute which he had with the royal family also gave him a social status among his own people, and people out of respect started calling him as Ayappa. And it's quite possible that Ayappa is a terminology or a nomenclature that was probably given to him, name given to him out of respect from the tribal community. It's quite possible that after his death, a temple was constructed for Ayappa by his own clanmen in Shabarimala, and subsequently this particular temple got renovated with the patronage of the Panthalam kings, and then it grew up in stature.
Sir, you've mentioned that Shasta was a non-Brahminical guardian deity that later got amalgamated into the Brahminical traditions. Even so, similarly, Ayappa was a non-Brahminical tribal deity that later got amalgamated. So, are there any differences in their iconographical features?
Yes, there is iconographical differences between Shasta and Ayyappa, both in images or icons and his painted forms. Now, I had just stated that in and around Shabarimala temple there were memorial temples dedicated to renowned persons within the society, sometimes preachers or sometimes their own movements had the privilege of having shrines being erected with certain brass images in them. And also in the tradition in Coorg region, we had noticed that Ayappa was represented as a plain or simple smooth stone. So it is quite possible that the initial temple, which was built in honor of Manikandan or Ayappa at Shabarimala, may have installed either a very smooth simple plain stone, or may have installed an image of an ancestor like that of Thalani, which is recorded by Matir. So what exactly was the nature of that particular icon, we do not know. However, this temple was renovated in 1910 by the Panthalam royal family, and also with the association of Sri Moolam Tirunal Ramavarma, who reigned between 1895 and 1924. So during the time of this renovation, this earlier image was reinstalled, and an icon or an image similar to the one which you notice in the Sabarimala temple was made and installed in that particular temple after renovation in 1910. And this old image was destroyed in the 1950s in a fire and some sort of activities by miscreants in that area, and it was destroyed, and then a replica of that original image was made, and now it is under worship. The earlier image, it states that it was crafted by an artisan called Prabhakar Acharya, and it was erected in Kollam 1085 or equivalent to 1910. So 1910 is the first time when you see an image or an icon similar to the one that you notice in the present shrine being installed. So previously what it was, we do not have any idea. Now when this idol was made, by that time I had told you that by 17th 18th century the concept of Ayappa and Shasta was getting overlapped in belief and in vocabulary, and because of this particular fact, and there was also because of the association with Buddha and Shasta, so that terminological association also was there. So when the first image of Ayappa was crafted by Prabhakar Acharya, he seems to have been influenced by the Shasta images and the late Buddha images in Kilirur and places like that. So when he crafted the image, he introduced certain new iconographic characters in the image of Ayappa. For example, till then Shasta images were only seen, noticed seated on a pitha, just a pitha. But in Kilirur image, you will notice that the Buddha or Avalokitara image was seated on a Padmasana or a lotus pedestal is installed. So that particular fabric or that particular character of having a lotus pedestal was introduced into the Ayappa image which is crafted. Similarly, we notice that Shasta used to be crafted with Jata Mukta, or used to be a representative character of Shasta. But by the time the image of Buddha or Avalokiteshvara was carved in Kilirur, that gets replaced by a crown. So the aspect of a crown is introduced into the image of Ayappa. That matted locks, which were typical characteristic of Shasta, is done away with. Normally, the Shasta images are not represented with any mudras as such, whereas the Kilirur image is shown in Jnana Mudra, I told you earlier. So when it comes to carving this particular image, for example, the Jnana Mudra which was there in the right hand of Kilirur image is replaced by the Vyakhyana image which you see in Buddha. The Dhyana Mudra or Jnana Mudra is held where he is seated in Padmasana with Jnana Mudra on his lap. But that has now been replaced in the right hand of Ayappa, and he is depicted in the Vyakhyana Mudra. This Vyakhyana Mudra is never seen in any Shasta images as such. So the first craftsmen who made the images were sure that they have to bring a differentiation between Shasta and Ayappa, or initially represented as Manikandan Sami, or the memorial. So the Vyakhyana Mudra which you see in Sabarimala Shasta is not found in Ayappa images, is not found in Shasta image. So that difference, the difference between Shasta and Ayyappa image is that the Ayyappa image does not have the so-called matted blocks or the things which you see in the same basically Shasta images. Shasta images, I told you that most of the cases he's seated with one leg on the pita and one leg hanging down. But in Ayyappa image in Shabarimala, you see that both legs are raised and placed on the Padmapita and tied with a Yogapatta. The Yogapatta is a feature which I told you that it comes only in 17th century. Images of Shasta only starts developing this character of Yogapatta. So the image of Ayyappa at Shabarimala has borrowed the Yogapatta character from Shasta images, whereas the character of the Shasta images like the matted locks, they have been done away with. The placement of leg in Lalitasana, where one leg is placed on the thing, that is removed. The pita is replaced with Padma Pita, or a simple stool or platform is replaced by Padma Pita. So these are the essential difference that they have brought into this thing. Apart from that, the kayuras or the jewelry which is worn by Shasta images, they continue to be imitated in the Kilirur image, and also you see that in the Ayappa image. If you iconographically and stylistically observe the Kilirur images of Buddha, in Kilirur and Nirambur images of Buddha and Shasta images, there are certain characters of the locks or the jewelry and hairs coming down into the shoulders, and certain ornamentations coming down into the shoulders. That you will notice also in the Shasta in the Ayappa images. And now Shasta images, in majority of the Shasta images, one ear used to be decorated with Patragundla and other used to be imitated by Ratnakundla. In Kilirur and Neelambir images, you notice that both the images carry Ratnakundla. And similarly in Ayyappa image also you notice that the Patragundla has been done away with and it is replaced by the Ratnakundla. You will observe that in the Ayyappa image at Shabarimala, both the images have only Ratnakundla as such. So these are the basic iconographical differences that have been brought about in crafting the first icon of this thing. So Ayyappa image do not exist prior to the one that was installed in 1901. We do not have Ayyappa images. Shasta images which are existed in different places have been sometimes nomenclatured or called as Ayyappa, but the true Ayyappa image which was installed for the first time in Shabarimala temple was crafted only in 1901, and in 1950, after this image got damaged in that fire and vandalistic activity there, the same model was recreated again and installed in the temple. So essentially iconographically there is a difference, and copying this particular Ayappa image is seen. Subsequently there many temples started installing such images similar to the Ayappa image in Shabarimala. Now if you observe Shabarimala temples which have come into existence posterior to 1950s, everywhere you will observe that they generally are all the icons are of very small nature, and the prototype of it lies in the 1901 Ayappa image which was first installed in the Shabarimala temple. So all Ayappa temples later follow the Ayappa image which was installed in Shabarimala for the first time. Now this particular image also reflects a character of the tribal icons, because unlike major Brahmanical temples, this image is kept very small in size. It is hardly around 1.5 feet in total length. So it follows the basic character of a tribal icon, which is never that is an icon of an ancestor and worshipped by tribals. So they are not very large, and they are also made out of bronze. So that character is also reflected. Even Shabarimala temple, though it draws millions of people from across the world, the temple, the Sanctum Sanctorum enshrining the image of Ayappa, is still very small. There are many things, many facets which are still prevalent in the religious rituals and practices at Sabrimala, which seems to undercover the tribal traditions. I'll go into that later. But Ayappa images or painted images are found in many temples across Kerala. Sabrimala icon or the idol of Sabrimala, like I said, was first installed in 1901. However, there are representations of Ayappa in mural paintings of Kerala, and it has been reported from many temples in central Kerala and a few temples in North Kerala. And this image again, or this representation in mural paintings, has often been misidentified as those of Shasta. And like I said earlier, there are images of Shasta painted in murals, and in mural painting, Shasta is also always depicted as four-handed riding a elephant, and he has a very pleasant face, a very golden color, and he wears normally he wears a yellow color veshti or a dhoti, and he is shown in very peaceful countenance, and he essentially basically wears a crown and character of a devata. Now Ayyappa is also found in represented in the paintings of murals of Kerala, and many of these representations go even earlier to the image of or the icon of Ayappa in Sabrimala temple. Now mural paintings in temples which have depiction of Ayappa, the Tiruparamgoda Mahadeva temple in Malappuram, the Payanur Bhagavati temple in Pathanamthitta district, Muraya Mahadeva temple in Kannur district, Iringalur Mahadeva temple Kozhikode district, Vakamoli Mahavishnu temple in Kozhikode district, Chemmanthita Mahadeva temple in district Tricur, Tripraya Rama temple district Tricur, Tiruvanchikulam Shiva temple Thrissur, then Elangundapura Subramani temple Ernakulam, Udinapuram Subramanian temple Kottayam district, Pundrigapuram Vishnu temple Kottayam district, Echumanur Mahadeva temple district Kottayam, Pandavata Shasta temple Kottayam. Pandavata Shasta temple is important because it has inscriptions and also it has both the depiction of Shasta and Ayyappa. And then there is Thayil Mahadeva temple Kottayam, Manganam Sri Narasimha temple Kottayam, Trikodathanam Vishnu temple district Kottayam, etc. There are many more temples with Ayyappa depictions, and in all the paintings of Ayyappa in murals, Ayyappa is always depicted as a dark complexioned person, possibly to denote his aboriginal origins, and he is shown riding a prancing horse or a horse with its two forelegs raised up, and he invariably has only two hands. Sometimes he is shown astride the horse with legs on both the sides, or sometimes with one leg folded and the other leg hanging from the horse, and invariably he holds in his left hand the reins of this horse, and the right hand always has an arrow, and his facial representations vary from very fierce or very bulging eyes to very calm looking person also. His facial demor changes, and in all the representations he is shown with Kirita Mukuta, he is shown with a crown, and in some of his representations there is also some parasol bearers, some people holding umbrella over his head. This holding of umbrella is a sign of or a sign of a dignitary. So he must have held some socially relevant or socially appreciable position for him to have received that the parasol above his head. He is always shown leading a hunting party, and there are also some of his clansmen surrounding him, and in many of the panels you could notice that surrounding the main Ayyappa depiction depicted on a horse, the horse is again depicted in two colors, generally in white, but in some places he is also depicted, the horse is also depicted in green color. Surrounding his painting would be forest scenes, hunting scenes, forested environments, and hunting of swine, hunting of tiger, hunting of leopards. Sometimes the leopards are being carried on poles. invariably in some of these paintings you notice that below the leg of the galloping horse is a net enclosure protecting wild and domesticated animals, and sometimes toward the lower portion of the panels you see a man attacking a tiger or a leopard with a sword and sheath in his hand. So essentially the panels these mural panels which depict Ayappa depict him as a hunting deity or a leader of a hunting group in the forest, and also associated with him are panels depicting his own kith and kin. Sometimes some of them are standing in Namaskara Mudra, sometimes you notice that forested tribe group carrying hunted animals like swine, deer, such animals are being carried, and hunting scenes is obviously associated with the depiction of Ayappa panels. So this depiction actually confirms or reiterates the popular belief that Ayappa was essentially a tribal deity connected with hunting. So in paintings, which I categorically state, some of which are earlier to the icon or image installed in Shabarimala, clearly shows that Ayappa essentially has his root in the tribal belief, and he is represented as a hunting deity. Now, as far as hunting deity goes, whenever the hunt used to take place in Coorg or in Shabarimala region, it is mentioned by Europeans who have recorded it that after every successful hunt, coconut, rice, and arak used to be offered to the deity of Ayappa, who is a benevolent deity as far as hunting is concerned. So, as a gratitude for successful hunt, coconut, rice in different forms, and also arak used to be offered. Sometimes fowl and other animals used to be offered. Sometimes the hunted animal like swine itself used to be sometimes given to Ayappa as an offering. So, essentially that root tradition was there because Ayappa was considered a hunting deity, but they have been slowly they have been included in some other varying forms in Ayappa temple also. So essentially, though the icon may not reflect the hunting character or which is popular in the paintings, paintings which are earlier than this thing clearly shows that Ayappa in belief and in practice was a hunting deity associated with tribals, and also that he held some sort of recognizable or respectful position in the society for him to be riding a horse and some parasol or umbrella holding people accompanying his hunting mission. So Ayappa definitely has in paintings, it reflects both the character, that he was a person of some reputable character, and also his association with paintings as a hunting deity is reflected in painting, though not in the sculpture which was later introduced into Shabarimala temple.
Are there still rituals and practices in existence in the Shabarimala temple that relates the ancestry of the temple back to its tribal background?
Like I said earlier, the records from British period say that tribal communities, especially Malayarians and other communities also, had worshipped in the Shabarimala temple. And if we go by Krishnaya's record, which is published in 1939 or so, he says that Ulladin tribes used to worship Shasta and Shabarimala, and people from the Kochuvelan tribe, they were the ones who were associated with annual offerings during the time. And this particular community, the Kochuvelans, also had goats sacrificed at Shabarimala temple for the safe and secure travel of pilgrims to the forest and the Shabarimala temple. So till 1939, if we go by Krishnaya's report in his publications called Travancore Tribes and Caste, the community of, though I told you that in 1910 it was renovated and the new image was installed, but still it looks like, if we go by Krishnaya's report published in 1939, it looks like the tribal community had an upper hand in the worship of the Ayappa at Shabarimala. It was only probably in 1950s, after the reconstruction of this particular temple, again this particular total Brahmanization process, or the tantric form of worship of the icon came into being, and all those new formulas or new worship nature came to be installed. But if you go by the deities which are there in Shabarimala itself, like his own attendant figures like Karta Sami and Kochukarta, and they are all names itself suggest that they are of, essentially of the tribal origin. And again there is this controversy about who Maligaparth Amma was. Now Maligaparam and Amma. Maligaparam could be, Maliga means it could be a mansion or a big house and things like that. Amma is definitely not an honorific title which is associated with tribal communities as such. So it's quite possible that this Maligaparth Amma was represented, as as a separate female divinity in Ayappa, in the Ayappa temple complex, and the myth says that she was in love with Ayappa, and Ayappa refused to marry her, and said that the day fresh or new Swamis don't turn up at Shabarimala, he would marry her and things like that. So it appears that this Maligaparth Ammas, there are many stories behind it also. She probably was from some renowned family of that time, who probably had fallen in love with this valorous young man from the tribal community, and because of the social situations then prevalent, they could not get married and live married life, and so continued to be there as a companion to Ayappa in his temple. So it's quite possible that that is also that also reflects the social bifurcation that was there between these two people. There are many practices still lingering in the mythical and the functional ritualistic things that is happening in Ayappa temple at Shabarimala. Now Ayappa is also associated with Mahishi. Now, who is this Mahishi, and when did Mahishi get slain, and these are things which are again related to so many myths and stories. Now in the Kuruk traditions, it is said that after successful hunt, sometimes a Mahisha or a buffalo used to be tried in the forest, as so that it could be devoured or sacrificed for the forest beings which are there. It could be tigers, or it could be other animals, or it could be for Ayappa. So that tradition is there. So it's quite possible that the tradition of killing a bison or this thing was prevalent in the hill tribes also after successful hunt or successful annual festivals and things. It's quite possible that that becomes associated with Ayappa after his Brahmanization as killing of the Yakshi, Mahishi and things like that. Similarly, in Ayappa in Coorg and also in some of the ancestral temples that were prevalent in Shabarimala region, after successful hunt, that is coconut, rice in different forms, arak used to be offered. Arak has been done away with Brahmanization of the deity, but even today Shabarimala temple of Ayappa is the only temple in Kerala probably where a devotee is supposed to carry rice and coconut as part of the offerings to the deity. So it's a continuation of that particular tradition. Similarly, we say that, like I had told you, that in paintings he is invariably shown holding an arrow in his right. This arrow is also associated with certain traditions there. Every Kanya Ayyappan or a novice Ayyappan visiting Shabarimala is supposed to carry a arrow in his hand and deposit it at Sharanguti. So Sharambuti, that carrying of the arrow is also a tradition which is associated with the tribal hunting deity Ayappa. So there are many things which are still lingering in the traditions there. But over the period of time, over the past few years, maybe more after 70, that so much of new rituals and new deities and new format of worship has been introduced, that many of these things are there in the undercurrent, but it is covered with so much of Brahmanical and other mythical stories. It is very difficult to take the wheat out of the chaff. So that is a tradition. There are literally, but nobody would understand these, but they would say that it is part of tradition and then force you to continue. Similarly, many rituals associated with Ayappa temple and Shambhala are all recently introduced. They are not in par with the tribal practices that used to be vogue in ancient past. At least in 1950s, maybe, because 1936 Krishna Iyer says that goats were sacrificed. So that clearly shows it is only after 40s or so, 1940s or so, that or after the second renovation of the temple in 1950, that many of these practices were done away with.
Recently, the entry of women into the temple of Sabrimala caused an uproar and a socio-political debate among the public. So, how do you address the issue, sir?
That's a very relevant question as to when this restriction of entry came into being is something which we should do not know for sure. But when Modern Corners wrote this report in 1863, so it was published in 1863. So maybe even if you take 4 or 5 years before he has done the survey or whatever. So even if we take 1860 as a benchmark, so in 1860 he had mentioned that in this particular temple at Sabrimala, which is dedicated to mountain deities, entries were restricted to women of a certain age limit. Okay, and the reason which he gives for that particular is that he says that sex in that particular vicinity is averse to the deity. So no sexual activity should take place in the forested region close to the temple. Hence, that there is a restriction of entry of women in that age group. He does not say that the deity installed is Ayappa, and Ayappa is a Nitya Brahmachari as conceptualized today is never mentioned by Modern Corners. So clearly it shows that the concept of Nitya Brahmachari, which now in a way prevents ladies' entry into the temple, has no substantiation, at least from the first record which mentions it, because he only mentions Ayappa as Sabrimala temple as a temple dedicated to the mountain deities, and that is the main criteria. He doesn't say that the deity is Ayappa and Ayappa is a Nitya Brahmachari, is never mentioned in that particular point. I had already mentioned that Sabrimala temple seems to be a memorial temple dedicated to Manikandan Swami, who was subsequently called as, or he was addressed honorifically as Ayappa. So what is at practice among tribal community should have been this principle that was vogue to restrict entry into Sabrimala temple. In many of the tribal communities, the movements of the headmen and the male members of the family decide upon the tribal religious practices and things like that. Ladies do not have much role in that. And like in modern community, there were many restrictions to ladies not to enter certain premises during the time of so-called pollution, either in childbirth or menses and things like that. There were certain entry restrictions. And similarly, ladies of the tribal community never used to venture to worship in any of the ancestral temples which were meant for or which are made or for the movements and things like that. Even if you go to some tribal communities, even today where there are burial places there, ladies will not access the burial places on their own. They'll show you from far that is a tribal place and walk away. They don't enter into the burial places. Now, since the Sabarimala temple at Ayyappa was a memorial temple dedicated to Shasta, dedicated to Ayyappa, I'm sorry, it's quite possible that because of Manikandan Swami being, socially a very renowned person, and he being worshipped as Ayyappa, that the Sabarimala temple was not visited by tribals in the community. When tribals who were living in that community did not venture into worshipping Ayappa for a certain period of time, the people who were in control or in charge of this particular temple, like I said in Krishnaya's report, the Ulladans had a mainstay in that worship up to at least 1930s. So they would have also actually communicated this to people coming from other regions. They would have communicated that ladies are not allowed to enter the temple during that particular period of time. So it is because of the tribal continuation and their passing on this instructions to particularly the other people that this tradition came into vogue. And Sabarimala is now accessible within a day from any place in Kerala, and you can come back. But earlier there was no means of transport and things like that. People used to walk barefoot in taking a trek of 10 to 15 days in reaching Sabarimala temple from different parts of Kerala. So the trek was difficult. So that also was one of the reasons for not including the ladies, because in case anyone fails in some health issues, then the whole trip will have to be cancelled and things like that. So that is essentially the essence behind all this. Now, debarring entry, as if you consider that aspect that he's a Nitya Brahmachari, so that concept should have come only very late, maybe after 1950s when these new sorts of rituals and regulations were introduced. It's only possibly then that this Nitya Brahmachari concept and things like that came into existence. But definitely it seems to be a practice which was working in tribal community worshipping Sabarimala and Ayyappa in that particular region. Because even before, even the first report says that it is basically the tribal community who worship. They do not speak of ladies coming from other parts of Kerala to worship, but subsequently as importance grew, people started doing. So essentially the belief and practices that was vogue in the tribal community also got conveyed to other people. You see, earlier I told you that it was only the tribal community who used to offer coconut and rice. Subsequently now every devotee going to Sabarimala carries it. So in a way the tradition is continued of the tribal practices. Some of the traditions have been continued, but it is given a wheel of certain traditions and practices, and so that is a thing that has been involved in. Now the traditions, if you go by traditions, these traditions are definitely not very old. Now if you want to say that it's got a very hoary antiquity, then that doesn't seem to be possible, because 1930 then essentially there were even other practices like sacrificing of goats and things like that, which is not now vogue. Now if traditions are to be continued, that also need to be continued. So that has not been continued now. So you can't say that every tradition should be continued and it's not subjected to, it cannot be subjected to revisions, it cannot be subjected to, modifications is something which we should look at from our cultural point of view. So many traditions have been modified according to, so many rituals that were conducted. So many rituals have been introduced in Sabarimala, from 1950 onwards. Every year you see some new function being organized. Earlier Sabarimala temple, according to British period records, it was open for only 5 days a week. And only one Brahman Pujari used to come and do the pujas during this particular season. There is no mention of Sabarimala temple being open for 41 days during Mandala Puja and things like that. These are not at all prevalent. They have introduced that. So society needs to change from, they have changed the rituals of Shabarimala temple from tribal to Brahmanical. So the concept, if you go by the concept that he is Nitya Brahmachari, so a restriction should be done, does not seem to be whole good, because the practice was not worked till at least 50s. Now if somebody wants to visit it, constitutionally you can't stop them from this thing, and Supreme Court verdict also cannot stop them. Now ultimately it is for the society to decide whether you want to continue, or you want to introduce, or you want to exert yourself by a provision that is provided by law, or you want to restrain yourself by societal or religious norms. So that is left to the women concerned. Ultimately they say that let us talk less of religion and practice more of religion. So it is to the society who wants to, whether they want to continue or introduce a new tradition or stick on to the old traditions, which is not really very old. That is another aspect. But the decision should go to the believer. So the believer will reign supreme.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a wonderful and enlightening talk. I hope that everyone would have gained a new piece of information through today's discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rahul. And in this particular research which I undertook on Buddha, Shasta and Ayyappa, I have got helping hands from so many people, and I need to thank them also. And I like to thank Dr. Preeta Nair from the Department of Archaeology for having gone through the draft of this paper and suggested corrections and some modifications to highlight certain aspects. Dr. Abhay, again, he has also been very kind enough to go through the draft and suggest me some sort of corrections and things like that. Dr. Rajesh for setting this paper so beautifully in this journal Heritage. And as far as photographs and detailing goes, I think my big thank goes to Dr. Sheena here. She has been instrumental in giving me photographs of many temple sites which I had earlier not known of. And thanks to her that she brought to my notice many temples with mural paintings of Ayappa, and the most interesting temple from Kottayam, which has both depictions of Shasta and Ayyappa and also inscriptions. So thank you, so many people have been supportive for this research. And one person whom I would also express my gratitude was to Renu. Renu, our librarian in the department, has been so cooperative in searching after one book after the other. When I find references, I would request her to find that for me, and she's been very kind enough to search those volumes and source those books and make it available to me for my research. And thank you, Renu, also for helping me in my research towards this particular topic. In this particular research, I think one person I need to thank is also Dr. Ambli CS, and the explorations which he undertook at in Pathanamthitta district was actually very encouraging, and thanks to her that we were able to notice temple ruins in many areas in the forest, and also actually find out some temples where actually simple plain stones have been worshipped. Though the context has now changed, but we did notice something very similar to the ones which are noticed in the Coorg region. And I thank wholeheartedly Dr. Ambli for sharing the photographs and sharing the requested information. Thank you once and all for this great opportunity. Thank you.